Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I'm not sanctimonious anymore. It is I, the master of fun and wonder, the existential Mr. Rogers, and of course, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, here with Gilbert and Tallulah for this Robservations number 243. Gilbert hears me, unlike yesterday when I had to leave the program abruptly because these dogs are going a little nuts. I think Gilbert knows better. He's going to be yawning. He wants a cookie. Come here, Gilbert. You want a cookie? You know you want a cookie. It's show 242. Everybody loves it when Gilbert gets up on my knee and has a cookie. I know I love it. Right, buddy? Yeah. Don't you just love that? ASMR Gilbert eating cookies. Organic cookies. All right, buddy. That's enough. I haven't even started the show yet. You're on the show and I haven't even started. How about that? Oh, hey, buddy. You, dude. You got to get down. That's my special Gilbert language. You buddy. That's what I say, and Gilbert knows what I'm saying. He translates it. It's amazing. It's like speaking bocce, but not. Anyway, once again, I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. This is Robservations number 243. Robservations is, of course, the show about something. And you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, you imagination connoisseurs, you make this all possible. And it's great to once again have you live. You never know what's going to happen to me on this show. Let me tell you, it could be explosive. But anyway, we are, I just, again, have to thank you guys for participating and doing what you all do. And we've had an amazing week of stuff happening. And I feel the buzz in the air is palpable. Whether we're talking Joker or Star Trek, I just feel like things are just ramping up. Peaky Blinders dropped. Mandalorian is almost just a little over a month off. We got The Irishman coming out. The Breaking Bad movie drops on Netflix, El Camino, this week. I don't know what to say. There's just amazing stuff rolling down the pike if you are, as you are, imagination connoisseurs, because you're here. If you weren't, why would you be here if you weren't that? There's so much to be excited about. I have not watched In the Tall Grass. Vincent Natali, who directed, of course, Cube, that I actually first saw at the Sitges Film Festival, which is in the midst going right now, my favorite film festival in all the world in Sitges, Spain. I first saw Cube in 1998 when I was there with Free Enterprise. It actually won the festival. Vincent Natali directed In the Tall Grass, that, of course, is based on a Stephen King, Joe Hill novella. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm excited. I can't believe that you get to watch that. There's so much good stuff going on, but I'm thinking Star Trek, which is probably a surprise for all of you. But before I get into that, let me remind you that this show is brought to you by Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com, you, by punching in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity, will get 20% off your order. I am dropping another one of my little Living the Lucky Tiger Life podcasts. I interviewed James Hills again about his trip to Loreto, Mexico, which is actually in the Sea of Cortez on the Baja Peninsula facing the mainland of Mexico. I didn't know much about it. Cool place, cool pictures. Check that out. It'll be on the Burnettwork later. I also want to say Elizabeth this weekend is participating in the Pasadena Art Walk. This is a piece of her artwork here. That's a print. You can buy prints from her. You can see her art in Pasadena at the Art Walk. I probably will do the show. I will actually broadcast from the streets of Pasadena. I'll use my phone as a hotspot. I'll broadcast. You can come down and see her work. You can come down and chat if you want. She is in booth number 15. So come check that out. Come check us out. You can see more of her artwork. That's, of course, a piece of art that is from our upcoming children's book that we're doing called The Girl Who Could See the Forest Through the Trees. So come check that out. It's very exciting. Now, I've been thinking a lot about Star Trek, which probably comes as a great surprise and a great shock to you. And, Star Trek lately has been like Star Wars. There's dividing lines within fandom. There's people who love Star Trek and people who don't love Star Trek, people who are mad about the current state of Star Trek, people who aren't mad about the current state of Star Trek. I would like to tell you something that makes my gums bleed when it comes to Star Trek. Okay? And this is a small thing, and people are going to be like, "Oh, you're a nitpicker." But I am the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, and I want to talk about this short trek Q&A, whatever. Spock and number one trapped, number one trapped in an elevator. But I don't want to talk about them. I hated it, presumably. I'll tell you right away. I hated it. I hate the way Spock is written. I hate the whole thing. But what I really hated, as many of you know, like one of my favorite things in the world is, I don't know if you can see it. Okay. See in the corner there, right there? That's the refit Starship Enterprise. It's a 1/350th scale model of the refit Starship Enterprise. It's one of my favorite things in the world. By the way, look at those stickers. I keep putting them up. There's more all the time. It's one of my favorite things in the world. The reason that the USS Enterprise became one of my favorite things in the world, my fetish object. How many times have I built Enterprise models in the mid-70s when they put in all the decals to make all the original Constitution class ships like the Hood and the Potemkin and the Intrepid and the Yorktown and the Lexington? I, of course, had to buy 12 models and build them all. And it drove my mother berserk. She's like, why do you have all these models? Where are you putting them? Why are you hanging the same ship from the ceiling? I'm like, Mom, I'm not. This is the original Constitution class. You can get them all now. And I have to have, they were like Pokemon. The original Constitution class heavy cruisers were like Pokemon. You got to have them all, you know? And so I've loved the Starship Enterprise my whole life. As I've told you people many times, I used to sit in my room and I would, instead of looking at dirty magazines, I was looking at blueprints of the Starship Enterprise going like, I want to live there. So I'm very familiar with the Starship Enterprise. And the refit Starship Enterprise that was first introduced in Star Trek: The Motion Picture is my favorite fictional starship ever. Not that I don't love the original Enterprise from the original series, because I do. But the refit Enterprise, what an unbelievable redesign. And one of the coolest things was how much thought, when Andy Probert and people like Mike Meyer and everybody who was working on Star Trek: The Motion Picture, there was so much thought put into the internal structure and design of the Enterprise. There was a beautiful cutaway painting that I had. It was big too, of the Enterprise, that showed all the different decks and the configuration of it all. And one of the great things about Star Trek growing up as a kid, it all seemed so thought out. Form and function worked together. You believed it. And then Star Trek Discovery, with one of their short treks, which was really Star Trek, let's face it, Enterprise, showed me perhaps, I would say, one of the dumbest, of all the idiotic and dumb things that Star Trek Discovery has done, perhaps the dumbest, the thing that I hate the most, even more than the spore drive, even more than Michael Burnham being, of course, the center of the known universe, are the turbo lifts. Now, apparently, according to the people that make new Star Trek, there's all kinds of empty space on starships. We first saw evidence of this in, of course, 2009's Star Trek, when they decided to go shoot in a brewery to create, I don't know, verisimilitude, which, of course, didn't work at all. But there's all kinds of empty space in starships, in addition to giant, when you have transporter technology and you can materialize objects, or say water, why wouldn't you use, if you actually need water as a coolant, why wouldn't you constantly use transporter technology? And when water would get hot, you'd instantaneously beam it into another state and sort of recycle it that way. You would not need the weight of giant water tubes coursing through a starship, but whatever. According to Star Trek Discovery, and now this new short take, within Federation starships, there's so much empty space, you can actually fly work bees, which are the one-man worker ships that you repair things in. You can fly them inside the Enterprise or the Discovery. And there are elevators, this turbo lifts, look like they're on roller coasters, which I look at this and I'm like, I'll say right now, everybody involved with those designs and created those effect shots, you're all idiots. You're all idiots. You have no understanding of, you can't create, what you're supposed to do is create verisimilitude. Yes, even in Star Trek. And what's amazing for you people, has there ever been a show where you've had 50 years of design lineage that you can look at and go, what's inside a starship? Gosh, I don't know. Perhaps we should get the Enterprise D blueprints for ideas. You don't even have to go back to 1975 and get the Franz Joseph blueprints. Why don't you get any book, the technical manual? It's still in print. Just take a look. How do they do starship interiors before? There is no, I mean, other than the space that's in corridors, which I always thought even on the original series were a little too big, but turbo lifts, there's no empty space around turbo lifts. First of all, they're not on tracks like a roller coaster. They're not. You know, people don't rappel down. I mean, I guess they could, because we did see you could use rocket boots in the turbo shaft elevators. We saw turbo shaft elevators in we've seen them in Next Generation. We've seen them certainly in Star Trek V. We saw them. They are shafts, like elevator shafts, and presumably they use gravity control or however they work, but they're not on a rail system, and they don't look like you could be taking them up to the top of a mountain and go skiing. They're the single one of a show full of dumb. The turbo lifts in Star Trek may, as shown in Star Trek Discovery, may just be the one thing, the thing that most causes me to not just have my gums bleed, but to scoop out my eyeballs and puncture them with my mouth and take the goo and smear it all over my beautiful 65-inch plasma monitor, because that's how angry I get when I look at this stuff. And I think if you're doing that, there's nothing you're going to write that's going to make me want to watch your show. And I know a lot of people go, what difference does it make? You know, it does make a difference, because it shows an overarching philosophy and an ethos about your show. Is that if you can't make me believe in the interior structure of your starship, if it's completely unbelievable, you're not doing your job. You're not doing your job. I watched Star Trek. I watched Star Trek since I was a very young boy. And it wasn't until I got to see roller coaster turbo lifts inside a starship that it was the first time I ever saw one image. And I'm talking, I was in for Nichelle Nichols fan dancing in Star Trek 2. I was in. Count me in. She was sexy, backlit by the moon, dancing with fans, nude. I'm in, man. You know? But you show me turbo lifts portrayed as they are in Star Trek Discovery, I want to punch in the face every person who designed that shot. Why didn't the effects guys go, what is this garbage? Why are you asking us to do this? Have you ever paid any attention to the last 50 years of design work that has been done by all the people that came before you and done better? Alex Kurtzman looks like and goes, yeah, man, the turbo lifts, they're elevators. They're roller coasters, man. Let's make them roller coasters. And hey, let's have maintenance drones flying. Like, where is these giant cavernous spaces in a space-going vessel? Who would design that? I mean, I look at that stuff, I know. By the way, this is not going to be a rant about Star Trek. I'm actually going to scooch over into positivity. But I just wanted to say that they do this again in short treks. They're literally trapped in one of these things. The entire episode is basically about them being stuck in Fantasyland elevator. And they're actually, it's showcased in this episode how dumb the entire production staff of modern Star Trek really is. Now, I'm not blaming the actors. They do the best with what they have. But between those, the asymmetrical, whatever those collars are supposed to be, and the weird pipe, whatever. Looking at these turbo elevators just make me really want to jump out of a building. They make me want to end my life. I'm like, why do you do this? Who thought this up? What brain trust came up with this idea? And I hate them all. But most of all, I blame Alex Kurtzman for allowing this idea to come through. Someone like drew it, and someone like designed it, and then somebody digitally rendered it. They had to build that. What should we call that? I don't know. You ever see the old Dan Aykroyd movie, Nothing But Trouble? It was a movie that had a similar, whenever I see those elevators, I just think Nothing But Trouble. The whole movie was a little ill-conceived. Well, just like, I mean, if you want to know my metaphor for all of Star Trek Discovery, it is the depiction of the turbo shafts in these starships. I mean, everything. I don't understand. What is it about spore drives and Magic Land with Alice in Wonderland? Hey, you can take the spore drive to Spore Land and Spore Universe and Spore World. I mean, anyway, therein ends my rant. So let's bring it back to positivity. And before I get into it, well, I'm gonna let somebody else take me into positivity. James Wallace has written a letter, ladies and gentlemen, and a good letter. And I figured I'd start with this. James Wallace says, "Hey, Robert, for some reason, I don't know if it's the 40th anniversary or what, but I've watched Star Trek: The Motion Picture, the director's edition, at least 3 times within the past couple of weeks. Well, let me tell you, James, you get one of you and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay for that one. I haven't seen the film this many times in such a short period since it was on HBO when I was a little kid. In the early 1980s, it's not my favorite film in the franchise. That goes to Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan. However, I do love the motion picture due to how it's probably one of the last franchise films that is really unique science fiction that takes risks. A hybrid of Star Wars and 2001: A Space Odyssey. Also, I hate to admit it, but like you, the damn movie is on my mind more than I care to admit. Either thinking of images or the score. As I write this, watching it now brings back thoughts that this film, when it was released, people didn't see anything like it. Men in spacesuits floating beside model ships, a cloud entity like V'ger, a sexy bald woman, the Enterprise looking like a real spaceship. Still one of my favorite ships in science fiction films. I failed to get a great looking model of it. Someday I will. At any rate, this film may be cold at times, but it still does have heart, and it is Star Trek or faithful to it. Although it is nothing like the original series in the mise-en-scène, with the exception of Uhura's earpiece. I think part of the reason this film keeps popping up for me, in a sense where I keep wanting to rewatch it, is that it may be due to Star Trek PICARD. We are seeing the previews, and the member berries are popping up for us. Damn you, South Park. Patrick Stewart hasn't played Picard in 17 years. Only a 7-year difference from the time Shatner reprised Kirk in 1979. Well, actually, it was a 10-year difference because the original series went off in 69. We are anticipating this, in a sense, how you and other Trek fans may have anticipated the motion picture back in 1979. Except the difference here is that we aren't getting the full crew back to reprise their roles, and seeing Riker interact with Picard again has made some geeks get emotional. And I get it. I got emotional too. My problem is that it doesn't seem like Picard, nor does it seem like Riker. Again, only seeing them in snippets. But one of the things that takes me out of accepting them as their characters again and looking at them as Stewart and Frakes enjoying being around one another is that lake scene. Frakes' arm is around Stewart's, and he pats his hand as it rests on his shoulder. Now, a couple of things could have happened between the time of Nemesis and Picard. Jean-Luc could finally open up to his former crew to a point where they're touchy-feely with him. I mean, am I the only one that finds this out of character of Picard? Jean-Luc Picard was always stoic. He only revealed his feelings in front of his brother and Troy, one time in front of Beverly when he had Sarek's syndrome in him. Usually he was pent up. Now this could have been due to being a captain, that he remained closed off. By Nemesis, the stoic facade started to crack in bits. Again, I just have issues accepting that Riker could get away with the arm around Jean-Luc bit, but Stewart did say that this Picard would be different from the Picard we've gotten to know and love over the years. I really want this show to be good Trek. The motion picture back in the day might have disappointed, and Wrath of Khan saved the franchise and was a soft reboot. Perhaps this new series is Wrath of Khan to Insurrection and Nemesis. Both films had a lot of Stewart's input. A soft reboot of sorts for the next generation characters. My faith is shook by some elements of what I've seen, but I really want to be wrong here. Just that whole arm around the shoulder bit seems more like Frakes and Stewart than their respective characters. And that type of looseness with characters we've gotten to know over hours of television and films, I fear will hinder this show. We'll see. I hope I'm wrong. Side note, back in 2007, when I was a production assistant on House MD, Bryan Singer came in before we shut down due to the writer's strike. Bryan Singer, by the way, was an executive producer of House and directed the pilot. One of our accountants had a life-size Kirk poster that covered his office door. Bryan saw it and gasped. Kirk. First of all, I want to thank you for this letter, James. And this letter, I think, brings up something that has been problematic in Star Trek for a long time, mostly since Generations. And that is one of the really interesting things, one of the things that I have loved about the franchise is, of course, as a child, I grew up with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and Scotty, and Sulu, and Uhura, and in the second season, Chekhov. And I love these characters. And one of the great things about Star Trek, what happened, and what I love so much about Star Trek: The Motion Picture, is for the very first time we saw, forget the money, but the idea that, can you imagine trying to sell the idea of, yeah, we did this old TV show in the 60s and it failed after 3 seasons, but it has a fan base. So let's make the most expensive movie ever made and bring back all of those same TV actors and put them in this movie. This kind of thinking was insanity, and it never would have happened. Star Trek: The Motion Picture was really the first time something like this had occurred. Now, of course, people say, well, there's the Batman TV series and the Batman movie of that TV series. Sure. But this time had gone by. And what was really interesting about Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and what I have loved, and the reason it's my favorite Star Trek movie was, and I don't think it's the best Star Trek movie necessarily, but it is my favorite Star Trek film for a number of reasons. A lot of people think that Star Trek: The Motion Picture doesn't bear much resemblance to the original series, and I say absolutely it does. To me, it feels more like the original series than any of the other Star Trek movies, because what you're doing is you are reestablishing these characters in a cinematic, in a movie milieu. You had to go from the television screen to the big screen, and you spend time, like, think about it. We meet Spock on Vulcan undergoing the Kolinar discipline. We find out Kirk's a little obsessed. He's been stuck behind a desk for 2.5 years. McCoy has been studying, if you read the novelization, which, by the way, let me just give a shameless plug. I am not being paid to say this. The Star Trek: The Motion Picture novelization was re-released this week, or last week. It is a great version of the book. It's oversized. Gene Roddenberry, contrary to popular belief, Gene Roddenberry actually wrote the Star Trek: The Motion Picture novelization himself. He was paid $400,000 to do so. It is bonkers. There is all kinds of backstory. There's little what do you call it? There's little things. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on this, but there's little asides, that you learn about things, and they explain. There's even a term, I'll let you guys discover it on your own, that has been used by slash fiction writers for a long time, talking about the relationship between Kirk and Spock. There is a lot about 23rd century sexuality in the book. If you want to read a fantastic insight into Gene Roddenberry's mind and what Star Trek in his mind is, you must read the Star Trek: The Motion Picture novelization. It is fascinating. And I love that novelization, and it's bonkers. I mean, you read things about how Captain Kirk's mom had a love instructor and all of this stuff. It was what his vision of the future really was. And I love Star Trek: The Motion Picture for a lot of different reasons. But, you meet our characters, when you first meet them, they're unhappy. And we had never seen our characters in a state of unhappiness. Whenever you met them on an episode of Star Trek, I mean, sure, people are like, well, what about Time? Spock was not happy. He's throwing plumbing soup into the hallway. Yes, that is true. But for the most part, the characters in Star Trek were happy people. They were from a utopian civilization, and they were out on the edge of the frontier, finding new things every day, or maybe every week. I don't know. But when we met the characters in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, there was a somberness. There was a feeling of inevitability, of doom. I mean, the movie opens with a very intriguing scene, of course, when a wolf pack of Katinga battle cruisers were decimated by V'ger. and it was a very interesting way to begin a movie. And I know people are like, that's like The Changeling. I get it. I understand all that. But really what Star Trek the Motion Picture is about, and what James was talking about, Star Trek the Motion Picture is all about, as far as Star Trek is concerned, Spock finally understanding the value of emotion and humanity. And if you watch the director's cut, which is now, it's only available on standard def DVD. It's never been, because it was only finished. It was very short-sighted, but they didn't have the money to finish the visual effects in anything other than standard def. But they did release, with Robert Wise's participation, a director's edition, not a cut, but a director's edition of Star Trek the Motion Picture, where they added in, there was a lot of Star Trek as released. Star Trek the Motion Picture is a rough cut of a film. Well, it's not a rough cut, it's a fine cut. It's an unfinished movie. It was unfinished. It's always been unfinished. And the director's edition rectifies many of those mistakes. Some of them I agree with. Most of them I agree with. Some of them I don't. But it makes it, for sure, a better movie, because it focuses on the Spock story. And Spock's confrontation with V'ger changes him. It changes him. And what's really interesting, when we get to Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, you can see in Nimoy's performance, he has incorporated what's happened to the character in Star Trek the Motion Picture into his performance. He's more serene. He's easier going. He even makes a joke with Savek. And it literally is a transformational movie for Spock. And that's what Star Trek the Motion Picture's greatest strength is. And there are moments in the director's cut that were also in the ABC TV version, but there's a scene where Spock is crying. Literally on the bridge, he has a tear rolling down his cheek, and he's asked, "Is that for us, Spock?" And Spock says, "No, I weep for V'ger as I would a brother." And there's a lot more of that. And clearly when Spock goes in or out into V'ger and mind melds with the probe, he has a question he's asking. And by the end of the film, with the help of his friends, the question is answered. And the question isn't about V'ger, it's about himself. He realizes, this simple feeling as he holds Kirk's hand is beyond V'ger's comprehension. And that's why I love the film so much, because it is about how people can grow and learn and transform. And it's also the beginning of this idea that Star Trek was touching on these characters aging and getting older. And that was incorporated into the plot. Certainly they carried it through in a big way in Star Trek II. And I love that. And as far as this pop culture franchise that I love so much, to actually watch your characters grow, as I did. I mean, I was watching Star Trek as a kid, 5 years old, 6 years old. I started watching it. Star Trek the Motion Picture came out when I was 12. And that began the film series that carried me through my teenage years, my adolescence and teenage years. Star Trek The Next Generation came out when I was in college. And then as I moved from college into young adulthood, I had Deep Space Nine, I had Voyager, and then eventually Enterprise, while I had the feature films as well. So Star Trek has always been living and growing and moving forward and changing. As I've said many times, in Star Trek 09, in 2009, that ended. Star Trek did not go forward. It went backwards. And what it did was it mined territory that had already been well trodden, and trodden much better than we saw. We have seen no Star Trek in the last 10 years. Now, if you like it, I'm saying that's fine, but it is a shadow in terms of its storytelling. It is a shadow of its former self. They have nothing to say. What they're doing is they're recreating stories from other things. Now, the letter that, when James was talking about the fact that I've always made the point that what I want to see, and one of the things that I like about science fiction, is that science fiction always extrapolates what's going on in real life today and carries it into the future. My favorite science fiction does that. And there has been this weird thing in Star Trek, and I don't know what it is, and I really noticed it in Generations. When we met Kirk in Generations, in the Nexus, he's living in the woods in a log cabin as if he's living today, chopping wood, making eggs. Like, where is the where is the thought? Like, if you're a man of the 23rd century and you've been a starship captain and you've gone all throughout the galaxy and you've confronted everything from the Doomsday Machine to V'ger to Cybok, why would you go back to a log cabin? What's the 23rd century equivalent of this? And I feel that there is an easy, I mean, it was shocking when Picard went back to his family vineyard. Now, that was established in family, and it was clearly established that he didn't belong there. Picard belongs amongst the stars. And when you're no longer commanding a starship, this idea that he goes back to his vineyard, a place where we already learned he doesn't belong. But the fact that, okay, we know in Picard that he goes back there and he's clearly not satisfied. Why would Kirk dream up in the Nexus if the Nexus gives you the things that you want, that he's living some simple life in the woods? And I think that's easy to do. It's lazy. From a production standpoint, I understand it costs less money. But from a science fiction standpoint, it doesn't do anything. It brings back, it makes what you're watching ordinary to a certain extent. I mean, it was really interesting to see Vulcan in Star Trek The Motion Picture, and you see Spock in a place we'd never seen before, studying with Vulcan masters, and we learn about the Kolinar discipline that ultimately helps you through the discipline. Remember, they still have emotions. He says to purge all remaining human emotion, but it is a discipline. It's not like they don't get rid of the emotions, but they are very disciplined about dealing with them. And we get to see San Francisco, we get to see our future cities, but even in Star Trek 09, J.J. Abrams begins Kirk's youth. He steals a 300-year-old car and goes on a joyride. We don't get to see what the 23rd century equivalent of that is. And I feel that because the writers of these shows are not, I mean, clearly no one is reading modern science fiction. I mean, I could give you a reading list right now, just off the top of my head. Dan Simmons' Hyperion Cantos, Stephen Baxter's Manifold trilogy. I talk about Peter Watt's Blind Sight. Just go Peter Hamilton. There's a reading list of modern science fiction that deals with these kinds of issues that anybody who's trying to create modern sci-fi should read. That's why The Expanse is interesting, because it's based on a series of science fiction novels that is extrapolating real science with heady science fiction concepts, combining them, and it becomes really interesting. Star Trek always falls back, and I don't know where this comes from. When you see the On Golden Picard scene, when Riker and Picard are sitting at this pond, I mean, I get it. I understand. But to me, it is a lazy shorthand that brings the show down to earth, so to speak. And that's not what you want from Star Trek. You know, I mean, maybe it's a different planet. I don't know. But why is Riker living in the woods in a house that looks like it was built 20 years ago? And it's these kinds of things. Why am I watching a fucking turbo lift that is going on tracks like an amusement park, like they're in Space fucking Mountain, through the bowels of the interior of the Starship Enterprise, which makes no sense? What I want from my modern science fiction is modern science fiction concepts that are being written by people that really understand sci-fi. Apparently, next week in Short Takes, we get to watch Tribbles being killed. I don't know why, because, oh, hey, you know, let's do a Tribble short take where Tribbles, they multiply quickly. They take over a ship. Tribbles are bad. Like, we've never seen that before. Really? What brain trust came up with that idea? I mean, maybe Tribbles are now carnivorous. Who knows? They're going to eat people. But I just, so these are some of my thoughts. Now, I want Star Trek Picard to be good. As a matter of fact, I don't want it to just be good. I want it to be great. But I see what we're being served up is a bunch of things and concepts and ideas that we've already been given before in Star Trek. It wasn't exactly hard to come up with the idea to bring back the Borg, which they've been doing over and over and over again. But what I'd like to know is, what does a guy like Jean-Luc Picard living in the 24th century do when he gets older? I don't believe that a guy like him is like, well, you can't escape your past. I think Captain Picard would be commanding a ship on the final frontier until he dropped dead. So the premise to me, I understand. I get it. Let's bring everything down to earth. Let's make it all seem so we understand. If you're an actor like Patrick Stewart, you're not up on your modern science fiction. As a matter of fact, he doesn't know Star Trek. As I learned when, I interview people, they don't know Star Trek. They just don't. They don't watch it. They don't obsess over it like we do. It's a role they play. They did their job. They move on. But they're not steeped. Patrick Stewart does not own blueprints of the Enterprise D. I can guarantee you he does not, unless somebody gave it to him as a gift and he put it in his garage somewhere. One of the most amazing things about interviewing Rick Berman at his house was you would never know Rick Berman produced 25 seasons of Star Trek. You would never know. He had the painting of the Enterprise D that was in Picard's ready room, and he had a bust of Gene Roddenberry where he had a blindfold over Gene's eyes that he had on his desk when he was working on the show. And that's it. That's all he had. And so we as fans, when people come back and start making these shows, they're writing stuff that they know. Oh, yes, Picard's got to go back to his vineyard because that's the one idea that they key on. They watch, what are the most significant Picard episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation? Well, family's got to be in the top 5, right? So let's have a Resican flute and family and the Borg, because those are the top 5 or the top 10 that people watched. So we got to have all that. And Kirsten Beyer, who I like as a Star Trek novelist, let's do the Borg again. That's how the show, by the way, was originally pitched. There's going to be the Borg are back. Ooh, wow, that took a brain trust. Even if I said to my mom, my 80-year-old mother, I go, Mom, if we're going to bring back Star Trek The Next Generation, what do you think we should do? My mom would go, well, Bob, what about the Borg? They're scary. Let's bring them back. I'd be like, Mom, they dealt with the Borg over and over and over and over again. Do you have a new story to tell about the Borg? Well, what if there's more of them? Well, that was really done. David Mack's Destiny trilogy did the ultimate Borg story. So, anyway, I want to love Picard. I really do. I see things. It looks very interesting. It looks lavishly produced. I want to love Star Trek again. I do. But I feel like no one is actually trying to make Star Trek, again, as with everything else, they're trying to turn it into what the current showrunners want to turn it into what they think Star Trek is, which is really interesting because the ethos that Rick Berman brought to Star Trek was that he said, we must preserve whatever Roddenberry had come up with, whatever that formula was, we need to preserve what made Star Trek great in the first place and what made people love it. That was a completely diametrically opposed idea from what is happening now. Star Trek is being cherry-picked. These ideas are being cherry-picked, and everything is being turned into something else, which is strange to watch, because watching this latest Short Treks with Spock, I'm like, this is not Spock. This idea that when Spock comes on board the Enterprise, that he is somehow not fully formed, like within the 2 or 3 years that he's going to be on the Enterprise, or the 11 that he served under Pike, that he's going to end up being somehow irrevocably changed from the way he is. It's such a silly idea. It's such an idea. It's such a shortcut. It's such a storytelling shortcut idea. It drives me berserk. I'm like, read a science fiction novel. Where is the sophistication that is demanded? Go watch an episode like Space Seed. Look at how sophisticated Khan Noonien Singh is presented. Look at the Romulan commander in Balance of Terror, or the relationship Spock has with Sarek in Journey to Babel. I mean, the writing that went on in the original series was very adult within the confines of this action adventure science fiction television show. I've talked about this before, but one of my favorite exchanges in Balance of Terror is one of the great things about that episode is it keeps bouncing between the Enterprise and this Romulan ship. And the Romulan commander's best friend, the Centurion, his friend, are always having philosophical debates. And the episode Balance of Terror, if you've never seen it, the Romulans, because of their duty, are probing Federation defenses. Is it possible, if they find a weakness, that we can move a Romulan battle fleet into Federation space and perhaps take some territory? And the Centurion and the Romulan commander are having this conversation, and the Romulan commander is like, great, our new weapon is very destructive. It doesn't look like they can stand up against it. So there is a possibility that we can do something pretty big here. And the Romulan commander is like, great, my gift to the homeland, another war, just what we needed. And he doesn't want to be doing this. But his Centurion friend reminds him, but it's your duty. It is your duty. You're doing what you're supposed to do, what the Praetor wants. You're doing, and he says, he counters and he says, but must that always be so? Is this always what we have to do? Do we have to work for conquest and exploit weakness? Is that really, I mean, I could see him like Kirk would, Kirk would be such a waste of materials and men. And then, of course, at the end of that episode, the Romulan commander they both have mutual respect for one another. And the Romulan commander, in his dying breath, says, in another reality, he respects Kirk, admires him, says, in another reality, I would have called you friend. And these aren't just one-line platitudes where somebody says a couple of words about something and you go, see, they do understand Star Trek. No, the entire spirit of that episode is very, very interesting. And you're dealing with a great science fiction concept, which is, of course, based on a great submarine World War II concept, which is based on, of course, this idea about men in warfare in general. Why fight wars? What is your responsibility when you're doing so? A lot of really, really interesting stuff. Star Trek now has been reduced to a writer's room, a television writer's room of people that haven't read enough science fiction. They haven't watched enough Star Trek. And they really don't. They think the idea of a roller coaster turbo lift makes sense inside a starship because there's so much empty room in a spacefaring vessel. I don't know. Maybe they went on Princess Cruises and they've got those go-kart tracks. I don't know. But hey. Anyway, let me see if anybody has anything to say. I've seen some chats coming in. Let's see what you guys have to say. First of all, JB Bonifacio is here. Chateau PICARD is on RMB if PICARD is good. Well, first of all, you can now buy a crate of 12 bottles of Chateau PICARD for $900. I posted the link at the top of this chat in the live stream. Check that out. I'm sure it's a lot of fun. I don't know if it tastes good. I did read a pretty good review of it, though. Don Stellato says, I never watched a Bond film. Where should I start? Well, Don Stellato, I would start with the very first one. The first 3 James Bond movies are all great. Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and Goldfinger. And, even Thunderball, which can be a little slow, maybe a little bit of a slog. I still love it. It's the first big widescreen Bond. It's good stuff. I would watch all 4 of those. As a matter of fact, just watch all the Connery Bonds. And I will admit right away that Diamonds Are Forever, not so good, has not aged well. And it'll be interesting when you get after On Her Majesty's, You Only Live Twice, you come to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which they switched up George Lazenby, but it's still a terrific, terrific Bond film. There you go. Mark C says, is everything okay? You made a mad dash away from the computer just as your live stream ended. I didn't know there was a pounding at our front door that went on for like 5 minutes, as you could see. And it sounded like somebody's trying to break down the door. It really did. And we live in a pretty good neighborhood, but there's sometimes sketchy things that go on. So I didn't know what was happening. That's why the dogs were barking. It all turned out par for the course here. Teenage girls couldn't get into the house. They thought breaking down the door was going to be something, I don't know. I don't know. But yes, it all worked out well. I just didn't know what was happening. Willow Yang says, did Riker and Troy have a Beta Z wedding? Well, a Betazoid wedding. A Beta Z's their home planet. Yes, they did. You will, they do, and it's dealt with, but it's not dealt with for a while. You don't get to see it, really. But, Luxwana Troy has a Beta Z wedding, too. You'll get there, Willow. You will get there. Joseph is here. Joseph says, why don't you ever get Campy on the show? I should have John come on the show. I want to. My new setup that I'm still slowly but surely getting into it'll have a section built for other people to come join me, so I'll be able to switch. So absolutely, and I think that will be great when I do that. I would love to have John on the show, because why not? Let's see. I can't read that letter. It's too long. I want to save that letter for a different chat. Dieter Bastian's here. I love this letter. This is a total change of pace. Dieter Bastian from Deutschland. Greetings, Rob. Dieter here. Yesterday, I got more than a little disappointed when I went to the movies for a sneak preview. I didn't know what my multiplex would be showing, and since Joker is opening here next week, of course, I had some hopes. I even would have taken 47 Meters Down Uncaged any day of the week over the drama After the Wedding, which they were showing. Don't get me wrong, Rob. It was nicely acted by Michelle Williams and Julianne Moore, but I wasn't in the mood. I think also After the Wedding was directed by Bart Freundlich, who is Julianne Moore's husband in real life. But I wasn't in the mood for that kind of a drama, and the movie was simply paint by numbers. Nothing really stood out and left me cold emotionally. The pair in front of me didn't even stay till the end. By the way, the movie is a remake. Yes, it is. Which brings me to the actual topic you had on the John Campea show about no originality of movies, or why no one is going to see those movies who have new things to tell. When I saw the list John put up and their box office draw, I would like to give you a different take on why I wouldn't go see any of those movies in the theater. First of all, I have seen Fighting with My Family in the multiplex, but I have a friend who is a huge wrestling fan, and I was too in the old days, and still have some knowledge about the status of the WWE. So this one was a no-brainer, but I went just to accompany my friend. For myself, I would have left the movie out, simply because those little movies, release dates, are way behind here in Germany than in the States. In the US, the Blu-ray disc was already pre-ordered, and it was only 2 weeks away from hitting the shelves in your country. The movie Booksmart hasn't even seen the light of day here in the theater, and I already have the US Blu-ray. The disc is, the release date is 11/14 in Deutschland, so there's absolutely no need for me to see this in the cinema again, even if it was as good as everybody was saying. Midsommar has just started last weekend here and the US Blu-ray is just around the corner. Even the director's cut is coming out this month in the UK. No way am I paying to see it on the big screen. And no, Rob, there is no special membership program here available for making the decision easier. You pay every time. And since I want to see those movies in English, my selection about where and when for a possible screening is very limited. What Dieter is referring to is many foreign films are dubbed in German before they come out, especially a lot of American movies. The Peanut Butter Falcon and The Farewell won't see a release here until December. You guessed it, Rob. The US Blu-rays are already out by then and already pre-ordered. But I want to bring in another aspect. You and a lot of your imagination connoisseurs, I would presume, have a nice setup at home, and considering the movies on the list, none of them screams to me, see it on the big screen. Booksmart totally functions perfectly at home for me as it does in theaters. That same thing goes for Fighting with My Family. Those are the kind of movies I just don't feel the need for rushing out, even if they would start in Germany at the same weekend as in the States. And Rob, even if that gets your German douchebag thrown off Robservations, you're not a douchebag, Dieter. Do you really think I will go see a movie like Lighthouse in black and white and 4:3 on the big screen? Yes, you should. I don't think so. I know, Rob, I'm already starting my engines and leaving the shuttle parking bay on your lawn. And sometimes the movie subject just doesn't interest me. Blinded by the Light, an Asian kid listens to Springsteen, which helps him through life. No disrespect. I should say that in the case of Blinded by the Light, I believe it's a Pakistani person. And so in Europe, when you say Asian, it means there's a lot more people that fall under that word than there is here in North America. When we think Asian, we think Japan, China, Korea, Vietnam, and those places. But South Asian and East Asian, it's all different, but it's all the same, really. We're all humans. But I thought that was something to mention. I believe he's Pakistani in that movie. Happy birthday, by the way, to the boss. No disrespect to the boss at all. Happy birthday, by the way. But you know, Rob, I'm a metalhead. So to get me into the theater just won't happen in that case. Of course, the movie could be great. And we all know the stars alone don't sell a movie anymore. see the success of Downton Abbey against the same time Brad Pitt and Sylvester Stallone put their new movies in the theaters. The audience today asks more what it is about than who's in it. That's a secondary plus. And considering Ready or Not on the list, yet, yes, the attendance wasn't overly crowded, but a movie that makes 8 times its budget back worldwide is totally in the clear. Wouldn't you agree? Yes. Looking forward to seeing Gemini Man and HFR this Sunday because very rarely a movie opens here a week early before you get it. We'll report back if the shuttle parking space on your lawn is open again. Seen Bing Bang Boom yet? Seen Bing Boom Bang yet? Sorry, I had to ask. I've got to watch it. I'm sorry, I haven't watched it yet. Rob, meet you at the final frontier and give God his spaceship. Dieter. Well, first of all, Dieter, there's a lot of things that you say here that I'd love to unpack. And as somebody who, obviously everyone knows that I have Tango Shalom coming out, a film that I produced and edited that is one of these movies. And I think what's really interesting is when movies were made back in the day, before the advent of home video, and really home video started to take off in the very late 70s and early 80s. And then movies, you'd watch them on TV when they showed up, but nobody really wanted to watch movies on television. You went to the movies. So I think that I can't prove this, but I think that there was a philosophical difference in the idea that when people were making movies, that they knew these movies were going to be seen on the big screen. Like, I'll give you an example. I love Sidney Lumet's movie, The Verdict, that stars Paul Newman from the early 80s. I think it's an incredible film. There's a scene in that film, the very beginning of that movie, where the camera is pointing toward a pinball machine, old school pinball machine, and Paul Newman is playing it. And he's standing in front of a window. He's in a bar, but he's standing in front of the window that looks out onto the street. And it's a long shot. And it's just a man alone in a bar. But the image, the tableau of that image has meaning. And when you're watching that, the shot itself means something, just like seeing the character playing pinball, seeing isolated alone. But the actual shot was in itself, you could take that shot from the movie. You could take a still of it and blow it up and put it on the wall, and it would look like an image, man alone, whatever, man alone in a bar. And suddenly it would have that still image would have meaning to it. And now, especially having made films and made television and things like that, the way movies are made now, because you know that most movies are not going to wind up having a home on the big screen unless you're working on a studio spectacle, in which case things are different. But you got the idea that there was older movies, at least this is a theory, and it's a theory I can't necessarily prove. But the cinematographer and a director, there was a lot more authorship on an image by image basis in movies than there back in the day than there are today, simply because how movies are made, how people think about movies, where they're going to wind up. I don't believe, and that's not to say, look, every cinematographer, whoever works on a film, is trying to make every single image great. But there's also now many shortcuts, as there have always been, but because of the way movies are made, I feel that there is less authorship from a cinematic standpoint. And I think what Martin Scorsese was saying about the MCU is true. So much of big studio spectacles now are prevised. And that's not to say that a cinematographer and a director don't have a say in that. But when you are locked into the fact that you're going to watch Thanos' army arrive on Earth and fight the just reconstituted, undecimated Avengers, there's so many more concerns within the frame about how do you establish that. And you're not so much worried about making each image matter and have meaning. What you're trying to do is figure out how are you going to convey this fight. Now, that's not to say there's not incredible amounts of artistic endeavor that goes into that, because there is. There's an incredible amount of artistic endeavor that goes into creating those scenes, and many different people. You've got computer technicians, you've got VFX people, you've also got the directors of the film that have to get the live action plates. But there is, I think, and I think what Martin Scorsese was trying to say about movies like the MCU. I love these movies. I love these comic book films. I really do. I grew up with comic books. I love them. But there is they're plot driven, and the cinema of it, the meaning, those images. Now, that's not to say that these images aren't made up of beautiful shots, because they are. Everybody's doing beautiful shots. But the authorship behind those shots has, I think, been diminished. And the kind of movies that are getting made now, I think are, a movie like Booksmart, people are like, okay, it's very similar to an episode of television. And now we've seen television, the writing of television has been elevated to the writing of motion pictures. So there's been a blending. And when you can watch shows that are incredibly cinematic and incredibly compelling on your streaming services, and you go and you see a movie like Booksmart, how does a movie like Booksmart in the theater become different than being on a streaming service? I think it's not that different. And that's problematic. And I think that, yes, the spectacle of these Marvel Cinematic Universe films, or giant effects features, or Star Wars, or anything like that, demand to be seen on the big screen. But like Dieter was saying, many of the stories and many of the movies that are being made, in terms of what they're about and how they affect you. Like, look, I don't need to watch the Ingmar Bergman version of Lady Bird. I don't want to see that. But I did love seeing Lady Bird on the big screen. I did. I prefer to see any movie. Hell, I would like to watch every episode of Game of Thrones on an IMAX screen if I could, because I just think watching images larger than life is more affecting psychologically than watching them smaller. It just is. Case in point, Star Trek: The Motion Picture. When you watch Star Trek: The Motion Picture on a big screen with a big sound system, listening to that gorgeous Jerry Goldsmith score and those visual effects and seeing everything, it becomes mythic. It becomes overwhelming. It becomes every single shot is something to study and to be enveloped in and to feel. You watch Star Trek: The Motion Picture on TV, because it doesn't move. It's not paced the same way as an original series episode. I firmly believe there's a lot of people that called it Star Trek: The Slow Motion Picture when it came out. But you know what? And compared now, if you watch it, but if you go see Star Trek: The Motion Picture on a big screen, you realize that the images themselves have meaning, and there's a reason for them to be there. The fact that it takes so long to get inside V'ger is supposed to create a sense inside of you of how big this thing actually is. There's a couple of really great shots. One of my favorite shots in all of Star Trek, there's a above shot looking straight down onto V'ger as the Enterprise, dwarfed, flies down the spine of V'ger. And that shot has meaning. And on TV, a shot like that wouldn't work very well because it's hard to see what that is. But on a big screen, and that's the Enterprise, it is terrifying. So what Dieter is saying is absolutely true. And I think that's really the problem with movies today, is that there has been a blurring of entertainment. The entertainment on television and streaming has become awesome. And then the movies, especially independent movies, a movie like Booksmart or Lady Bird, both movies which I think are wonderful films, but they're very similar to something you might see on television. I still think it's better to see movies on the big screen. I think it's better to see any programming on the big screen because it becomes larger than life. When you watch something on television, as much as I love my little home theater and the images that I can get, you don't feel it as much as you do in a movie theater. You just don't feel it. And I think that now we've come, there's so much content, we want to get through it so quickly. Tell me the story. I get it. I get the story. We want to know what the story is. I get through it. Okay, I get it. I understand. We'll go on to the next thing. And the cinema of it all is sort of left behind. And it all becomes like a blur once you know the story. And to be fair, you watch a movie like Endgame, you can pick out, you're like, oh, there's a couple of great shots that you remember in the whole movie. The rest of it, movies are made now, they're very perfunctory. The language of cinema is quick, over the shoulders, these kinds of things. There's not a lot of cinema happening. But I defy you, go throw on Casino, just came out a couple weeks ago in 4K. Throw on the beginning of Casino, of Martin Scorsese's Casino. Watch the first hour and tell me if it isn't. As a matter of fact, do this as an experiment. Do this for me, people. Do this for me. Get Casino, and even if you don't get the 4K, which is stunning, Robbie Richardson's photography, watch the first hour of Casino. Just do this as an experiment. On the biggest TV you can, turn off the sound. Turn off the sound. I watch movies without the sound all the time as an editor to study the actual editing. I do that all the time. When I'm cutting my own films, I watch the reels without sound, and I'm like, nope, we got to add 2 frames there, 1 frame there. Turn off the sound though, and just watch the images. Watch the cinema of it all. Just the visual, and you'll be blown away. Blown away. You watch a movie like Casino, because that movie, it's constantly moving. The shots are beautiful. It's tour de force. We don't have enough of that in movie theaters anymore. That's why people are like, they'll go see the spectacle. But the problem is we're missing the cinema. And I'll tell you, one of the things about The Joker is how beautiful that film is. There is a lot of cinema going on in that movie. And I'll tell you, it would be lost if you guys didn't see Joker in the big screen first, because it is beautifully photographed and beautifully composed, and see it on the biggest screen you can, because it's overwhelming. The use of close-ups, the use of wide shots. On TV, it would not have nearly the impact it has on a big screen with a big sound system. But I think that's part of what we're missing. A lot of these movies are, they're being directed with not a whole lot of cinema in them. And that's fine. The way movies are made today, you don't have as much time. You don't have as much money. You don't have as much will. And you certainly, you're just trying to make your day. When you're trying to make your day, like, we need an over. We need overs. We need close-ups, medium shots, wides. That's what you're thinking. You're not thinking about the cinema. It's like, okay, I got this idea. Every close-up in Joker was thought about. There is authorship in it. And that's part of the reason people are responding to it the way they are. So, Dieter, I think this is a great letter. I really liked what you had to say. But you're right. Unfortunately, I hate hearing people don't want to go see movies in theater anymore because they got to be worth it. So, Mellow Yosh. Are we going to see tribbles with teeth now? That's Star Trek's version of critters. I don't know. I just saw somebody with a phaser rifle walking through the corridor of a starship shooting tribbles. Great. I mean, if that's the case, I think the whole idea of what a tribble is supposed to be, the fact is that a beautiful, a very soothing, docile creature, the fact that a tribble could be an actual ecological menace, I mean, could destroy the biosphere of a planet if they got onto the wrong planet. I think that was sort of the point. And watching tribbles that that have teeth or are carnivorous or would eat you defeats the purpose of what they were. Again, because hey, if that's it isn't understood that that's what tribbles are. Like, oh, what if tribbles had teeth? If that episode, I have no idea. If it's what if tribbles had teeth, my answer to you is fuck you. You uncreative idiots. But anyway, I don't know yet, so I'm not going to get mad. Hi, Rob the Magnificent. This comes, of course, all the way from across the pond in Sweden from Stubble McShave, longtime connoisseur, longtime imagination connoisseur, and member of the Post-Geek Singularity community. Hi, Rob the Magnificent. The other day, you talked about how you can't set out to make a cult movie. This is in some ways reminiscent of a previous letter I wrote, that movies are like food, and it's a creative process where the best movies and dishes are done by a creative chef rather than a cook following a recipe. In movie making, as with most works of art, there's often a plan for what to do, but there's always room for, and in some cases demand for, improvising and spur of the moment decisions. That's very organic in nature. You have to go with your gut sometimes. Most of the time, a cult movie has that special ingredient that the creators didn't think of in the beginning, but it was a spur of the moment decision that they didn't think of in the planning stage. An example of this is the famous scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Indiana Jones shoots the master swordsman. It was planned as a lengthy sword fight, but as it happened, Harrison Ford had dysentery that day, didn't feel up to the physical exertion. So instead, someone said, I think he said actually, why don't we just have him shoot the guy? And an iconic, awesome scene was created by improvisation and people following a gut decision. In the planning stages, you often don't see these opportunities that are often born from something screwing up your plans, the actor making a spur-of-the-moment decision, or the director seeing an opportunity at a given moment. These iconic scenes are very hard to plan from behind a desk. They are often created in the middle of production, and it's these special flavors, making the food analogy again, that often makes something special and gives it cult status. The cult status is something that's bestowed upon a movie afterwards and not something you get at once. You can set out to make a great movie, but it's very hard to set out to make a special movie. That happens through organic, spur-of-the-moment decisions that you can't plan from behind a desk or over a conference table. I always will end with this quote. As always, I will end with a quote. This time it's from Oscar Wilde. Morality, like art, means drawing a line someplace. Thanks, Stubble. Well, Mr. McShave, that's a great letter, but I have to tell you, what you just described happens each and every day while you're shooting a movie and each and every day in the edit bay. Those kinds of, look, planning a movie, the more planning, the more pre-production you do, the better off you are. You can never have too much pre-production. You can also never have too much going over the script. But like with every battle plan, nothing survives contact with the enemy. And no plan to make a movie ever survives production. Things always change. And I'll tell you, you might have what you think is the greatest script in the world, ironclad, but an actor will do or say something, their interpretation of the character. They can say the exact same words that have been written down on the page, but their performance is different than what was described. And sometimes that can be magical. And as a matter of fact, when I've worked on, admittedly, I've had limited experience doing what I want to be doing, which is directing, because who doesn't? But the times that I've had, there have been times, I'll give you an example. Patrick Van Horn, who was in the movie Swingers, was in Free Enterprise, and he has a scene where he's confronting one of the other characters, comes to the office, and he's conveying that his best friend is taken up cooking with his new girlfriend. And the line was, cooking. Can you believe that? Or whatever he says. Patrick Van Horn, in take number 4, ad-libbed. He says, cooking with a pan and fire. And he makes he's got a fictitious pan and he's moving around like he's scrambling steak or eggs or something. I lost it. I don't know where he came up with that idea. It wasn't in the script, but the spirit of what it was and the spirit of what his character would do and respond to the idea of his friend cooking was perfectly exemplified in that one ad lib. I used it. You use that stuff. And that happens on movies. I was watching Martin Scorsese talking about making The Irishman. He has his script. But when you have actors that have worked together and you've got a camaraderie, you understand that a script, it's not theater where you don't change a word. It's movie making. And sometimes if a character, an actor might have a different cadence the way he speaks than he's been written, than his character or her character has been written, and the actor will tend to make those lines their own, that's when the magic happens. A great director knows when to use that, when to actually get what was written and do it one way, but allow an actor to do it another way. There is nothing better than having intuitive, intelligent actors that can look at a text and make it their own. Now, does that mean any of you actors out there should roll into your next audition and ad-lib? Absolutely not. I mean, it takes some brass balls to start doing that. You don't do that, but you could gauge how it's going to go. when you're in an edit bay, you're making a million different decisions. There are times when things aren't working. You have to figure out, like, my God, we don't have the insert shot we need, or this doesn't work, or that doesn't work. What can we do to make it better? And you're solving problems. So movies are an amalgamation of happenstances that that were unplanned. And it's knowing how to wield those happy accidents. And there are happy accidents every single day on a set. Now, this doesn't mean that it's going to slow you up. When I say accidents, it doesn't mean that a light fell over or somebody got electrocuted. I don't mean that. I'm talking about creative accidents that aren't really accidents, but something might happen. And you're like, oh my God, I love that. I gotta use that, and it's something you didn't expect. When Indiana Jones says that, when Harrison Ford said that, I'm sure he didn't expect Steven Spielberg to go, well, yeah, because Steven Spielberg, I'm sure, as you know, if you've seen it, has that whole swordsman fight was going to be a big fight. It's in the novelization. Sure, it was storyboarded meticulously. And Steven Spielberg was smart enough to listen to that idea and go, yeah, that's exactly right. And they did it. And it became an iconic moment in the film. But you have to be smart enough to know. You have to know your material enough to know that you can make that kind of a change. Can you imagine? I mean, if it wasn't George Lucas and Spielberg at the height of their powers, that if the studio expected to see that sword fight and it didn't happen, and you're like, nah, we just gunned him down, the studio would have gone berserk. You would have gotten in trouble. Hell, an executive might have shown up on your set the next day. What are you doing on this film? You have to have people that are trusted, that understand, like, that moment was hilarious. And what does it do? It plays on all of cinema history. We expect a big fight with a big swordsman. Like, what are you going to do? And one of the great moments of that, one of the great things about that moment is it's totally unexpected. Like, of course he would use his gun. Why wouldn't he? He's carrying a gun. The guy's threatening. Why not just blow him away? Like, it never even occurred to us while it was going on. And the fact that he pulls his gun and uses it is what makes it so amazing. Terrific. And movies are full of that all day, every day. But I think the difference is, when I was talking about cult movies, for instance, I was talking about this not a couple shows, a while ago, because Hedwig and the Angry Inch came out on Blu-ray, and I was talking about how I love Hedwig. Hedwig has all the makings of a cult movie. Certainly does. They knew the play had a cult around it. But I don't think when they were making it, at least when you watch the documentary about making that, they didn't know at the time, especially when they were doing the play, just how it would resonate with people. You can only tell the story that you want to tell and hope people are going to like it. You can't ever try and service the idea that there is a cult, unless, of course, you've made Sharknado and you're going to make more, and you've got your audience there. And those movies, let's face it, are what they are. No slight to Anthony Ferrante, who directs those films, who I've known for years back in the Sci-Fi universe days. But those movies aren't exactly, they're not trying to play it straight. But cult movies like a Rocky Horror Picture Show, or like a Hedwig and the Angry Inch, they touch people in a certain way. And then they'll sing about it. But they reach out and they grasp something inside of people. If you're a certain kind of a person, you'll respond. And I think that's something you can't plan for. It has to be inherent, baked into whatever it is that you're making. And that's how a cult develops around a film. I don't think you can plan. You can't say, I'm going to go out, I'm going to try and capture the hearts and minds through this amazing story that I have to tell. You hope that happens, but what you really should be doing is concentrating on the story that you're trying to tell. Don't worry about your audience. If you're making a movie, you are presupposing there's going to be an audience, because the only reason you make a movie is to show it to other people. You're not just making a movie to show to your friends. And if you are, I don't know why you're spending so much time and effort to do that. And by the way, if that's all you're thinking, you're not putting enough into the film, so you shouldn't be doing that. But making a movie presupposes an audience, so it's up to you. It's your responsibility as a filmmaker to be true to the story. Never put your freaking universe before your story and characters. You've got to concentrate on your characters and story first. That's all it's got to be about. You've got to make it about the story and characters. The universe will take care of itself. The universe will come up. It'll rise up around your characters. Iron Man 1 was about Tony Stark. And if you watch Iron Man 1, it's a pretty intimate story. really. Tony Stark ends up going up against his friend of the family, a dear friend that he ran a company with and his father knew. And it's basically about, it's a character study about a dude that's in the guise of a comic book movie. And going back and watching Iron Man 1, it's very interesting to think that, wow, now if you didn't know that there was going to be a Marvel Cinematic Universe, or even that Iron Man was based on a comic book character, and you just watched it and it was a one-off movie, you would never know. But it really works because it's about a character and the story. The universe came later. They were not thinking in Iron Man 1 that this is going to be, I mean, they were, but they knew enough. They're like, we are not going to put the Marvel Cinematic Universe before Tony Stark and before Iron Man. We have to concentrate on our character and our story. And then the universe can grow around it. It's the only way it works. And I believe that. I believe that entirely, ladies and gentlemen, gentle people, all of you. Willow Yang says, why were the Tribbles pink in the animated series? I'll tell you why. I think that was just a way to easily convey how cute they were. I think when you see pink, the color pink, it has certain connotations to it, and making the Tribbles pink easily, I mean, for kids, remember kids, it was made for Saturday morning. So I think, and they weren't just pink, there was different shades, but I think that's why they did it. It was just an easy shorthand for kids, but it's a good question. They made them looking less like real animals on the animated series, because it's tough. This letter comes from Jeffrey Mao, a man who's written a number of letters. He's a great member of the Post-Geek Singularity community. I like Jeffrey Mao's letters. He always writes something interesting. This is one of those letters. Greetings, existential Mr. Rogers. Recently, I was reading a Screen Rant article stating that Zack Snyder had originally intended to include Martian Manhunter in Justice League. Well, he should have. This story was filed under the umbrella of the Snyder Cut, and that's what I would like to discuss today. The Snyder Cut and the larger implications of the movement behind it and how that impacts our genre-loving world. Oh my God, I didn't read this letter before I opened it. Jeffrey, are you really taking us down the Snyder Cut road, the rabbit hole of the Snyder Cut? All right, I'll bite. I'll do it. Let's first establish that the likelihood of a Snyder Cut being released in any way is probably close to nil. There's likely no actual cut that exists that would not require extensive CGI, post-production, and shooting to complete. Warner Brothers is extremely unlikely to authorize this. I'm not on top of all the Snyder Cut news because a lot of it seems like leaks, stuff that Snyder himself has let out or other people who worked on the film have said. It's possible that he may have produced a very rough work print. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong on this. Regardless, it sounds like he was well into production when he was replaced by Joss Whedon. This is obviously where the major calls for the Snyder Cut have come from. Many fans probably feel that Snyder was pushed out and that the excuse of him having to cope with his daughter's suicide was conveniently used. It probably doesn't hurt that it makes Warner's look like a bunch of cold and callous jerks who weren't liking where Snyder was going anyway and wanted to Whedonize the movie. It's also likely that a lot of calls for the Snyder Cut are coming from diehard Snyder fans who really like the direction he wanted to go in and aren't Whedon fans, and probably are also Marvel haters who think that Whedon is still a Marvel guy who came in to do a sabotage job on DC. That's so silly. But anyway, as you can tell with my line of thinking there, it's going well into tinfoil hat territory. Now, it's easy to dismiss the Snyder Cut advocates as just that, tinfoil hat types, but look at it from the perspective of DC fans who got really excited in the early years, say from 2013 to 2016, when we got Man of Steel, then BVS, then Suicide Squad, and then we were going to get a two-part JL movie and Wonder Woman and Flash and Aquaman, hell, even a Cyborg film. It was great. Mind you, at the same time, I was always thinking that they're going about it the wrong way. An old Batman, and you're not going to have any of his rogues gallery, Wonder Woman just showing up, heavy-handed setup for the next films. Then the wheels started to come off, or more like they realized the car was just a nice shine job, but it was rusting underneath. Snyder's not the subtlest director on earth, and when you rush a shared universe, you get problems where Macho Snyder, who's well known for his TNA and also insisting that his male stars are as jacked as he is, wanting to sex up Wonder Woman and the Amazonians, which contrasts strongly with Patty Jenkins' more female-focused and honestly better rounded take on Diana. Then you hear about the studio meddling, rewrites, retooling, the Suicide Squad mess with the different cuts, and Justice League was just the last straw. It's one thing to be disappointed and unhappy with a film. It's another thing when you realize that there could have been a better version, but it was suppressed and replaced by the studio because they thought the other version, the so-called Snyder Cut, was going to be more appealing to the hardcore fan, but may have been too overstuffed and full of setup. And not only that, the two-parter was getting cut down to one film only, so the studio just wanted to get the film out, cut their losses, and retool. Add on top of that the already existing anger about the Snyder Cut and a certain group of DC fans that just can't take it with the more kid-friendly direction of Shazam, which is still in universe but barely. A Batman film which was supposed to be Batfleck Does Arkham Raid style, but now is morphed into a Matt Reeves-directed Robert Pattinson starring young Batman film with no apparent connections to the DCEU. A period standalone Joker film with no connection, an Aquaman film with sort of a connection, and the sequel appearing to continue that. The Flash film continuing to wallow in development purgatory, and Wonder Woman 1984, also a period piece. It's no wonder that the Snyder Cut movement still exists. These fans are seeing that the prospects for a continuation of the Snyderverse are pretty much nil and dead at this point, and it hurts because it could have been different. Was it all too much too soon for Warner Brothers and DC? Probably. Ultimately, was Snyder the wrong guy to put so much responsibility onto and be the guy to direct the universe? Probably. I think objectively, the approach from the beginning was wrong. We know they were envious of Marvel and wanted to create the same cinematic universe. They were even better situated than Marvel. They had no reason not to be able to create a great universe. However, from even the beginnings of the DC films, the question had to be addressed. I feel that this question is the one that has troubled Warner Brothers and DC all of this time. It is, how do you make Superman and Batman work together? Do you have Superman exist in a Batman film? Do you have Batman exist in a Superman film? If you answer yes to either question, that raises issues. If you answer no, that also raises issues. In the end, this whole Snyder Cut debacle has caused me to think that no matter how it sucks for Warner Brothers DC not to be able to get their universe together, they may be better off making standalone or relatively standalone films and franchises. I'll use their comics to illustrate my point. Compared to Marvel, DC's standalone one-shot issues and series are much more well-known and renowned. Think about Year One, The Dark Knight Returns, The Killing Joke, Gotham by Gaslight, Red Sun, Kingdom Come, and many others that I'm sure I'm missing. DC characters seem to work best in reimaginings, reinventions, and reboots. This may be why the Joker film has been interesting to see, and that it feels similar to what DC has done before. I still wouldn't mind seeing a revived DC cinematic universe, and it looks like J.J. Abrams has. I'm sure we all cringe at the thought of his mystery storytelling approach being applied to DC. But for the short term, at least the next 2 to 4 years, I think the road that WB DC is on is the best for them, especially with the more stable management at the helm with Walter Hamada. They aren't going to go back to the Snyder Cut, but I would advise Warner Brothers DC not to dismiss the movement behind it. They are arguing for the cut because they feel that Snyder was hard done by. If he really was or wasn't is something we'll never know, but that's the impression. Joker has been successful both commercially and critically because Todd Phillips pushed for the film, got to make the film that he wanted with little to no studio interference or influence, and the studio is backing him in all of this controversy. If every other DC film can be made in the same way, and certainly they all won't be anywhere near as controversial, then no one will argue for an alternate cut. We need a run of that from DC, and I think the ship will be righted. With everything that we've seen so far from James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, it looks like we'll be getting that. This is probably also a mea culpa for Suicide Squad 2016, but it's a good sign nonetheless. Well, I've rambled on for long enough. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts, Jeff. Well, Mr. Mao, once again, you do not disappoint. When you said it was about the Snyder Cut, I was about to go, oh my God, and seeing how long the letter was, I'm like, I'm already in this letter. You're a longtime imagination connoisseur. How can I get out of this? But I'm not going to get out of this because I think you make a lot of good points. Here's what I think about the Snyder Cut. And keep in mind, 30 years ago, I worked at Warner Brothers in feature production for Bill Young, who was at the time senior vice president of feature production. So I watched quite a few movies get made. I was in the office when dealing with physical production. There absolutely is a Snyder Cut of Justice League. Now, as you pointed out, that is not what people think it is. There was a cut of Tango Shalom 2 years ago. Wasn't ready for anyone to see it. There was a cut of it because when you're working on a movie, you make a cut. You know, if you watch the editorial pieces I did on the Lord of the Rings, I love dropping names on things I've worked on to make myself seem more important than I really am. But anyway, if I did a piece on the editorial of Fellowship of the Ring, and two towers. And the idea that Peter Jackson has is that if you shot it, it should be cut, or you should take a look at it. And one of the things he does when he's editing a movie is there can be many different takes for different angles. And say you're shooting a dialogue scene, people talking at a table. You might shoot 4 pieces of coverage or even more of somebody just saying, "Can you please pass the salt?" And you might have 4 different versions of that, 5. You never know. If you're Stanley Kubrick, you might have 50. But Peter Jackson lines them up and looks at all of them and goes, "You know what? I like that line reading the best." And what you do when you're making a movie is you find your favorite line readings, and then you go in and start cutting. When I worked with Lucas Kendall recently on cutting Skyfighter, he was very specific. He had on all the different takes of the film, he had his line readings. He's like, "This is the line reading. You're the editor. You make it work. Figure out how I get this line reading." Sometimes it was difficult. Sometimes it wasn't. But I loved working that way because Lucas not only did direct it, he wrote it too. So he could tell me, like, I like as an editor to be a little loosey-goosey, to sort of let's play with these scenes, because you can create magic in the edit bay. But when I was working with Lucas, he had his story was being conveyed in words and images, and he was very specific about which scenes and which line readings he liked best, which made my job as an editor much easier. It was a different way to work. You know, normally I've played a lot more in the edit bay, but Lucas knew, and it made cutting the movie that much more fun, because then for me, I'm like, oh, this is different. I now have to figure out how do we get from this shot to this shot, move around, and still make sure it all cuts together. And yet I didn't have to spend so much time hunting and finding everything. I knew exactly what he wanted and how to make it work, which was great. That's why Dust picked it up. And it's going to be on their network, on YouTube and other multimedia channels in January. Woohoo, yay us. But anyway, so when you're doing that, the Snyder Cut, it's a constantly evolving thing all the way up until the final sound mix of the movie. Now, yes, there is a time when you have to lock picture, especially in an effects-heavy movie. I think what happened to Zack Snyder was horrible, because Warner Brothers panicked. Batman v Superman was hugely expensive. And remember, the movie did very, very well, but they expected to make it was going to be in excess of $1 billion, but it was hugely expensive. I've heard some people tell me it cost up to $450 million with marketing. I can't speak to whether or not that's true. Well, it didn't. In the middle of making Justice League, Batman v Superman comes out. It was not critically acclaimed. It was very divisive in terms of audiences, even though it made money. And Warner Brothers blinked. They're like, how can we fix this? What can we do? Joss Whedon, obvious choice. He makes the Avengers Age of Ultron, which is what everybody looked to as the benchmark. I mean, that's what people were looking at. They were looking at Avengers and Avengers Age of Ultron going, we want to make this kind of money. This is what we want to do. The problem is the people at Warner Brothers didn't know how to do that. You know, Zack Snyder knew what kind of a movie he was making. I think the dumbest mistake that Warner Brothers made, well, they made two movies. Suicide Squad was basically taken away from David Ayer because a bunch of people do they know more than the filmmakers? When studio execs start thinking that they know more than the filmmakers, then you end up with disasters. Suicide Squad got pulled out of the fire. They were very lucky. Justice League, not so much. Justice League opens with a terribly CGI'd Henry Cavill's face on a cell phone. I mean, that might have been cheeky, but that was a really dumb way to start that movie. I mean, if nothing else, if you don't love Batman v Superman, I'm not saying you have to love it, but if you go and watch the ultimate cut, there is a feel to that movie. It has a point of view. And I don't love Zack Snyder's movies. I like what he did with 300. I really like what he did with Dawn of the Dead. I thought I was going to hate that movie. I was primed to hate that movie because, for those of you who are in the know, this is the logo or the original Dawn of the Dead for WGON, the TV station. That is name checked in the director's cut of, well, you see the helicopter that has this logo actually on it. Last Exit to Nowhere. They're the best shirts. But anyway, I think that Zack Snyder was bringing, he if nothing else, there would have been that trilogy or a quadrilogy if he'd made a second Justice League movie. They should have let him finish that film. Changing it was a mistake. They panicked. The execs at Warner Brothers panicked. They thought they were going to lose a ton of money. You know, this was a case of fanboys bitching and moaning and complaining, and it really was. There was a lot of ink spilled about this. They blinked. You know, one thing a studio needs to do and I've seen this, I saw this as a young man working for Bill Young, is there needs to be a synergy between the studio and the filmmakers. Now, most of the time, the studio allows filmmakers, they've been vetted, they know what's going on. And in my day, when I worked at Warner Brothers, every day after lunch, all of the dailies for every movie that Warner Brothers was making were screened. And it was an executive's job to go to those screenings and watch the dailies, which could be a very boring experience. I'm sure now it's all done on the internet, or they log into a secure server and go in to see these dailies. But I bet most people don't watch them. Just like I bet most people who worked on Star Trek Discovery never went back and watched very many episodes of Star Trek. Why should they? What does that have to teach them? But anyway, so the Zack Snyder was a victim of this. The studio, they had so much riding on it. There was, we need to make as much money as Avengers. Well, that's nice in theory. But the question is, and this is what people think, everybody thinks a cinematic universe. Ask Alex Kurtzman in his dark universe with The Mummy. You know, never put your universe before your characters. You have to concentrate on your characters and your story. The universe will take care of itself. And Warner Brothers blinked, and then the studio's executives are weighing in. They're like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Damage control. Let's get rid of Zack Snyder. Well, that doesn't make any sense. You're in midstream of production of a film. The man has a vision. He's prevised it. He's been directing. He knows what the movie's supposed to be. So do you guys. You were supposed to watch dailies every day, and you were supposed to know the script and know what was happening. These movies are not made in a vacuum. What they did to Zack Snyder was studio executives trying to cover their own ass. And as we know at the time, one of the Warner Brothers brass was having an affair with a young actress. His head was really where it was supposed to be. Anyway, it's neither here nor there. That Justice League failed because the executives at Warner Brothers failed. They panicked. They were all looking, they were rats on a sinking ship, and they done fucked up. And the movie should have been allowed to be made. And in doing so, because here's the problem, they don't know. Studio executives do not know how to make a movie. If you put a studio executive on a set and ask him to frame, or her to frame a shot, they're not going to know how to do it. They're not going to know. I mean, anybody can theoretically frame a shot, but do you know how to create verisimilitude within a vicinity of the frame? No, but they think they do. And then you wind up with Justice League. You wind up with a hot mess. People lost because of bad decisions and horrible stewardship at the studio level. You left on the table hundreds of millions of dollars, and you killed your extended universe. You killed it. You know, they pulled it out. Walter Amada came in, changes were made, and they're doing a good job. But you know what? I would love to see another Justice League movie. I wanted to see a Justice League movie my whole life. I was on Heroes talking about how much I want to see a Justice League movie. I love the Justice League. You know what? I love Ben Affleck as Batman. I loved Henry Cavill as Superman. I love Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. I love Jason Momoa as Aquaman. I love The Flash. I love Cyborg. They had the characters. I mean, it was insane. It was insane what happened to that movie. I think, if nothing else, wouldn't it have been great to see a Snyder trilogy? The Man of Steel, I guess it would have been called the Man of Steel trilogy, because it would have had Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Justice League, and it would have had an arc for Superman. But it wasn't meant to be. Now look over at Marvel. You've got a guy like Kevin Feige who understands what's going on. 13 Marvel movies he worked on before the MCU. Guy knows his stuff. You know, it'd be like, you know, I wish Star Trek had somebody like him. I wish somebody who could look, Kevin Feige would have looked at a picture of a turbo shaft amusement park ride and said, what the hell is this garbage? Get it out of my face. We would never have had to see those idiotic shots. I mean, yeah, we're following canon. How about following common sense, the laws of physics, the space in a ship? How big do you think your ship really is? Anyway, yeah, but the Snyder Cut, there was cuts, but it was far, far away from ever being finished, and the visual effects were nowhere near being done. And there might have even been the film might have even been close to being locked, but that doesn't mean you're not going to have to spend not just tens, but many, 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 many millions of dollars to finish that film. Then it would have had to been sound mixed. It's a real shame. I mean, it really is a real shame. And you know what? They hurt themselves. They hurt themselves. And it is a shame. But calling for a Snyder cut is ridiculous because no one's going to pay for it. Chris Pavoto says, do you think the PICARD series goes shallow or a deep dive in the aftermath from the Dominion War? The Alpha Quadrant lost thousands of ships and crew. You know what, Chris? To be honest, I think if you were to ask many of the people working on Star Trek PICARD about the Dominion War, they would probably say to you, what? What are you talking about? What Dominion War? What's that from? I didn't watch Deep Space Nine. No, but I don't think, look, Kirsten Beyer is going to make sure that, but yeah, I just don't think they're really going to go into it. They might mention it, because remember, this is going to be heavily leaning into Star Trek 09. This is all Alex Kurtzman's ideas. He doesn't want to go back and look at the Dominion War and talk about that. No, he wants to talk about his Countdown comic and what happened with the Borg and all the Borg technology that was used to build the Narada and all that stuff that they came up with. They're not going to go back into Star Trek lore. At least that's what I would say. Mark C says, on one of Kevin Smith's Fat Man Beyond podcasts, he has an audience member backed up by Justice League post-production crew Smith has worked with admit that the Snyder Cut is, or in some form, does actually exist. Again, it does not exist in a watchable form. You have to understand, when a movie like Justice League, when you have you might have a locked cut of the movie that's a year away from release. Like, you can literally, I watched a cut of Return of the King in Peter Jackson's house. It was a whole cut. Watch the whole thing. It was probably 20% of what the finished film wound up being. It was very, very different when it was finally finished. But it was a cut. You could watch it. You could ask anybody in post-production, hey, is there a cut of Return of the King? Yes. Yes, Peter Jackson's screening it for the DVD crew in his house tonight. Okay. I mean, there was. I sat down and watched it from beginning to end. It was mostly all green screen. There was very few shots because there's almost green screen something in the entire film. So this idea that yes, there are cuts of these movies that exist. They're nowhere near finished, but people don't, when you're working in post-production, you're like, yeah, there's a cut. There's a cut of the movie. There's always a cut of the movie to work off of. But that a cut of the film, as far as Hollywood is concerned, as far as working in the movie industry is concerned, is not like there's a watchable, finished version of the movie. You know what? I'll tell you something. I was on the mixing stage when X-Men Apocalypse was being made. The last day of the mix, they dropped in the shot where Sansa Stark went full-on Phoenix. That shot wasn't in the movie until the last day of the mix. I mean, it's the finished shot. There were iterations of the shot, but the finished shot. I watched it dropped in. There was like 20 effect shots in the middle of the mix. Brian and I and a couple other people, Elizabeth, we went in and we watched unfinished effect shots, well, of various iterations. The final, there was like 20 shots that needed to be finaled, and we watched them. And then they went and dropped them in. So there is no Snyder Cut that exists. As much as there's wishful thinking, there's no watchable Snyder Cut of the movie. There isn't. It's nowhere near being finished. And what they did finish, we saw in the final movie. The problem is, it would be really interesting because you could probably take what was finished for Justice League and put it into the Snyder Cut and get you a lot further along. So you could be watching a work in progress. Could be fun to watch, but there is no watchable Snyder Cut. There isn't. There just isn't. I'm sorry, there isn't. It's just not how movie making works. Mark C says, per Smith's show, Warner gave a preview showing of the Snyder Cut. Okay, well, it's not finished. It's not a finished cut of the movie. How many green screen shots are in there? I'll bet hundreds. It certainly wasn't mixed. Was it scored? Who would have scored that film? I mean, it's what does that mean? You can watch a movie. I wish I could get people to understand this. You can watch various iterations of a movie being cut from within weeks of a film. Usually, here's something people should know. Usually when a studio movie finishes shooting, there's a cut of the movie. Now, it's an assembly, or it's a rough cut, or it's a rough assembly, but you can sit down and watch it. You can sit down and watch it. That's a cut. You can be like, yep, this is the cut Zack Snyder was working on. There's always cuts of movies, but that doesn't mean that anybody outside of the production should be watching them. Hell, I've worked with people in Hollywood who have produced movies for years, and I'm like, you know what? I'd really rather not show this to you until it's finished. They're like, oh, no, I get it. No, even the most experienced people in Hollywood, I've worked with some very experienced people, and when they sit down and they watch movies, because as experienced as some producers are and things like that, you'd be surprised at how many people don't understand post. They're like, the car just crashed. Are you going to record? Are you going to have sound there? There's not enough sound. It's like, no, we were just going to leave it that way. That's a sound design issue. We haven't even gotten in there yet. But I mean, I've been showing Tango Shalom. We showed it almost a year ago. It was unfinished. The reason we showed it was we wanted people's notes and all that. And the movie is a vastly different film than it was when we showed it. That's just the iterative process of making movies. And this idea that there is some Snyder cut that can be finished, I just don't believe it. I don't care what anybody says. Sure, you can watch cuts of the movie, just like I watched a cut. If somebody showed you the cut of Return of the King that I first saw, people would be like, what is this? People wouldn't know what they were looking at. And they would think it was garbage. Because nobody understands. You cannot make that leap. If all you've ever done is watched finished movies your whole life, you will never be able to watch a finished movie unless you work in film, specifically work in post as well. You will never be able to fairly judge a movie until it is finished. You just won't, because you haven't been trained to be able to fill the stuff that's missing in your head. You'll bump on it. You'll always bump on it. So a preview screening of the Snyder Cut, sure. Absolutely. But it's not going to be anywhere near what it should be to show to anybody. And who's going to pay for them? Who's going to pay for that? I mean, I think that's problematic. And that's why because people don't understand, they don't get what that means. Brian Eng throws in a interesting quick chat. He says, Brian Eng says, I know you're against protecting children from the world. I saw a man walk past kids under 10 wearing a shirt with a large curse word across his chest. What do you think about that? Also, what do you think about open container laws, no drinking in beer commercials, and no cigarette commercials? Well, those are interesting questions. I mean, here's my thoughts on the world. I believe that when we, as part of a civilization, we should do just that. We should try and be civil to one another. When we go out into the world, you need to be mindful that there are people of all different shapes, sizes, colors, and creeds, and belief systems, and genders, and sexualities, and whatever. And you shouldn't necessarily expect them to conform to what you're doing. And if you're going out into the world, I mean, it's the same. I look at this. Would you go to someone's house for a dinner party and just start swearing at people? Using a lot of foul language? Would you talk about, the incredible blowjob you got last night at a dinner party of mixed company? Would you do that? Probably not. That isn't civil. So the idea that when you're going out into the world and there's going to be kids there, I think, isn't it always best to be civil than it is to be a monumental douche? Look, anybody that's wearing a big curse word on their shirt is a douche. They're just a douche. I don't care who they are. Unless you're at like a protest, a political protest, and there's a reason why you're doing that. But if you're just going to be an agent provocateur by having, the word fuck written on a t-shirt, to me, that's rude. That is not civil. And, Hannibal Lecter should eat that person because he eats the rude. Now, that's one thing. Now you ask about, what do you think about open container laws, no drinking beer in commercials, and no cigarette commercials? Well, open container laws are very different. I mean, again, people are douchebags, and you can't necessarily say that if people are walking down the street just drinking, if that's allowed, like, I don't know, you've had a couple of double Jameson rocks. Let's say I've had 4 of them. 4 is when I'm usually pretty toasty. Should I be out in public with my 5th double Jameson rocks, swinging around? Should I be there? Again, I don't mind open container laws because I can't rely on my fellow mankind, mankind and womankind, humankind. I can't rely on my other human beings to be responsible with that kind of stuff. It's probably just best not to have beer. Now, if you're in a place like, for instance, New Orleans, drinking on the streets, wandering around is something that's part of that culture. So I would amend my rule and say, yeah, New Orleans is probably pretty cool. It's okay. Why not? Sure. Depends about, again, the society, the civilization, the part of civilization you're in. It's not absolute. Nothing should be absolute. You've got to have room to move. That's also part of civilization, to be smart enough to understand that, here it's okay. Now, no drinking in beer commercials, I think, is ludicrous. And I also think that no cigarette commercials, I understand. Cancers is bad. Cigarettes are addictive. I understand alcohol is addictive too, and secondhand smoke. It's like when you want to drink, if you want to drink yourself to death, that's fine, as long as you don't get behind the wheel of a car. But when you're smoking cigarettes are affecting everyone. There's actual data to suggest that secondhand smoke is probably not a good thing. And the fact is, it was proven that cigarette companies are targeting young people to get them addicted to this substance early, and they weren't doing enough to clean up their act. So again, you're asking me a bunch of different questions that I think there's multiple answers to. But yeah, to recap, I think when you walk out into the world, it's always better to be civil and polite than to be a douche. I think that's pretty much a universal concept. I know from my own life, if I hold those doors open for people, or I say hello, or I get a little chit chat in with whoever is bagging my groceries at Trader Joe's, whatever, it's always a better life. It's always a better time to connect with people, because every person you meet has a story to tell. I've found that that's the best way to be. Smile at people, make yourself accessible. Life is better if you are open. Now, I'm not saying be naive and be open to everybody, but you will have a better experience, I think, at least I do, going through life, having a smile on your face. It's a lifestyle choice. And just, if you see somebody like, I don't know, you see a dude, like if I see a dude wearing cool sunglasses, I'll go, dude, those are cool sunglasses. If I see somebody wearing a t-shirt I like, a geeky shirt or not, if somebody's wearing a Seahawks jersey or a Seahawks hat, I'll be like, go Hawks, man. You see that Rams game? There's a connection there. And, it's not just a nod or something. If you acknowledge people and give them an opportunity to acknowledge you back, your life is going to be better. It just will. It'll be better. It'll be better. And especially with kids, there are kids around, I respect childhood. It's going to be stripped away soon enough. Why do you have to wear some shirt like that where a mother and a kid has to explain, or a mother has to explain to her kid, like, mom's like, I've been trying to tell you not to say bad words. Don't be like that guy. Actually, I think if you see somebody with that kind of a shirt on, it's a teachable moment. So maybe it's a good thing. Don't be like that douche. Open container laws, I think, again, depends where you're at. We in America, I don't know if we're mature enough. We have a real problem with maturity in public places. Not that there isn't problems everywhere, but there have been other places in the world that people don't have so much maturity, or they have more maturity because they grew up with things. France, Germany, I think they're a little bit, kids can drink wine from earlier ages. We're a little backwards in that sense. And as far as no drinking in beer commercials, that's sort of a weird thing. I don't get it. It's a beer commercial. Are you trying to pretend that, these are the stupid rules that we have in the United States. Are you trying to pretend that you're not going to drink the beer? Don't get it. Anyway, but I like the art. I like this. I like Brian. Brian, you've written me a couple letters about these questions, asking me about, basically it's about my morality, I think. And I like that. I think that's interesting. I enjoy that. This is another letter that I like. And I'm just going to say this comes from R. Well, I can say Ryan. I'll say it comes from a guy named Ryan. I'm not going to say his last name. He asked me to omit that. Rob, thank you for all the hard work for you, your friends, and staff. I love that. Staff, my moderators are my staff. They are great volunteers. One day they're going to get paid. The point of that would be to get this channel big enough that the volunteers are no longer volunteers, but they're paid. After hearing your thoughts and positive and negative criticisms of Joker, I found myself agreeing with you on your frustration over the apparent dummying down of Arthur, but disagree to the reasoning. Having dealt with offenders in the criminal justice system, specifically ones in maximum custody, with behavioral management issues, and some with legitimate psychological disorders, I feel that it would be completely possible for Arthur to be mentally ill and appear simple while having deep-seated anger and the ability to cause harm. Specifically, be able to generate complex plans like we would expect of the Joker. Many suffer from disorders similar to the appearance of autistic characteristics, where social behavior is almost unmanageable, yet they have the strong mental ability in other fields, like building items such as weapons, out of near nothing. I recall one that would cover himself in feces and throw feces with shards of broken light fixtures at staff. Yeesh. I often would converse with him in his recreation enclosure, and he was amazed at how articulate he could be, especially about talking about building things, cars especially. He could flip a coin and then destroy steel fixtures, remove any and all restraints, build weapons out of little more than toothpaste and toilet paper, and remove security screws with no tool near him. This discussion got me thinking, rather than playing off the new Joker with a sequel, which, based on earnings, I'm sure Warner Brothers will do, like it or not, with an intro to a new Batman or Harley. What if we maintain this gritty real-life look and introduced a sequel as an Arkham Asylum standalone, with Joker introduced to 2 or 3 other Batman villains in that setting, almost in a One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest style? If so, what other characters do you think would be interesting to introduce and why? Also, who do you think could fit a Nurse Ratched-style character? Maybe as a nurse, doctor, or therapist. Mine are Hugo Strange as a doctor at Arkham Asylum. I thought it may be interesting to introduce Harvey Dent pre-Two-Face as a young law student doing a psych-based internship. Riddler would be the villain 1, and villain 2 would be Bane. Thanks again, and keep up the great work. It is much appreciated. See, I have to tell you, people, this is why I love doing this, because Ryan's letter, it's amazing. He's actually somebody who's dealt with dangerous people in prison. He has insight into how this would really go down, and he writes in with that experience talking about the Joker. I love this. This is so great, hearing from people who actually know what they're talking about, yet who are still fans. This, people, is exactly why I love all of you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity, you imagination connoisseurs. That's why this channel is such a joy, because of everybody like this that writes in. By the way, if you do want to write into me, please go to the website, theburnettwork.net. There's all kinds of things there. There's all kinds of, every letter I read on the show will eventually be on there. We're a little behind, but we're getting up there. And there's also a lot of interactive stuff on the website, 3-word movie reviews, which I can't wait. I love reading those. The Imagination Connoisseur Gallery, if you have something that you want to share. We need to put an audio stuff up there, because I want to put Lynn Hobday's music that she sent me, and because it's great, and other stuff. So go there and interact. But if you want to send me letters, all letters I get at theburnettwork.net. And I think this is a great letter. Now, I love this idea. I think doing an Arkham Asylum story, I don't know if it would be, look, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Joker, I think is a great idea. I don't know if they would do that necessarily, but look, if you're looking at Taxi Driver and King of Comedy as your touchstones, why not then turn around and say, I want to do One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest next? I think that would be great. I don't know if I would put Bane as part of that. I mean, I love the idea of Hugo Strange being a doctor. And of course, the Scarecrow could be a doctor as well, or something like that. But again, you wouldn't lean too heavily into the fact that they're part of Batman's Rogues Gallery. They'd have to seem like they're very real people. I mean, it would be interesting to see Harley Quinn as part of that, and see if a relationship could develop in that situation. Like, it would be interesting to see Arthur actually being able to have his first relationship, even if it was inside of Arkham Asylum. How would he deal with it? Because certainly he didn't have a real relationship with Zazie Beetz. That was all in his head. But I love this. What a great idea. I'm in. Count me in. Yeah. Again, I don't know Bane though. I don't know if Bane's the person that should be in there. Let's see. Jaybird Third. Jaybird Third says Harv Bennett watched every Trek episode before taking on Star Trek 2. Trek canon still deserves that respect, but it isn't getting it from the new writers. Well, here's the problem. I mean, ultimately, and I'm going to come out on their side on this. These writers want to write something new. They want to feel like what they're writing is their own. And obviously, the people that are on the staff of the show, other than Kirsten Beyer, and I know David Mack is doing some consulting on one of the animated shows, and I think Michael Chabon. Look, everybody says they like Star Trek. Anybody who says, "Oh, I've always been a Star Trek fan," have you really? I mean, it's fun when it's on, but are you like a real watcher of Star Trek? Do you know? Do you watch Star Trek? Do you understand Star Trek? I don't think a lot of the people. I certainly have not been impressed because not only are we getting bad Star Trek, but we're also getting bad television because in not knowing Star Trek and trying to turn Star Trek into something else, you're giving us, look, the whole idea, reading David Mack's Section 31 Control novel, that clearly the latter half of Discovery Season 2, which was all about Section 31 and control, the way Section 31 has been portrayed so far in Star Trek Discovery is moronic. I would say, why don't you go look into, say, reading spy novels? I mean, it's just absurd. The writing, the level of writing on all these concepts, maybe they should go back and watch all of Deep Space Nine. Clearly, anybody that was grappling with the concept of Star Trek's Section 31 never did watch any of the episodes of Deep Space Nine where Section 31 was introduced. Because if they did, they wouldn't be portraying section, or maybe they would because they're idiots. But, and I will say that. I don't mean to be mean, but the horrifically bad pedestrian storytelling that we have been given on Star Trek Discovery is inexcusable, especially on that budget, especially when you can go back and you can clearly see that somebody had the idea, well, you know what Section 31 is? It's like the CIA of Star Trek. And someone's like, oh, okay. Let's have membership cards. No, the whole point about Section 31 is you knew nothing about them. You don't even know if Section 31 actually existed and if Sloan just didn't make it up. You don't know. And that was one of the great things about Section 31. Now we know Section 31 has a base and it's got starships. Everybody knows about it. Well, how about the fact that by destroying that ambiguity destroys the very idea of the concept of Section 31 in the first place? That's what I would say. You writers are stupid. And now you're going to do a TV show about Section 31. If they were really cool, if they were really cool, they would make a Section 31 television show and they would just intersperse it in the middle of other Star Trek and you wouldn't know. And then it would come out. It turns out that you've been watching Section 31, the Section 31 show the whole time. Like at one point, they just turn the opening titles get changed to Section 31 because you've really been watching this Section 31. Maybe that's the truth. Maybe that Discovery's, it's all just a lie. And then they're going to go back and they're going to actually make a Section. I don't know. It's so stupid. So dumb. But yes, I don't think anybody who's, please, Section 31 writers, if anybody watches this, please go back and watch Deep Space Nine. You'll enjoy it. It's fun. It's a fun show. It's great Star Trek. The last 4 years were great. Well, years 4, 5, 6, and 7. Watch them. You'll enjoy them. Is it hit and miss? Sure. But watch specifically season 6 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. It's one of the greatest episodes. It's one of the greatest seasons of modern science fiction television ever. Please do that for me, for the fans. I can't watch your dystopian Star Trek that makes no sense with elevators that look like they're amusement park rides. Really, I want to keep my eyesight. I don't want to pull my teeth out with pliers watching this crap anymore. And I do. I watch it. I hope, by the way, every time. I hope. I've never been let down so many times. It's like being an abusive. I'm in an abusive relationship with Star Trek Discovery. But on that note, I'm going to end this chat. This was a lot of fun. A lot of people here really enjoyed this. I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel through chats and sending me letters and all kinds of things. I want to thank my moderators, Detective Jim, the Honorable Mike Bodden, who apparently the race is heating up in Riverdale, Iowa. He expressed concerned that maybe he'll get beat in the election. Who knows? It's gonna be something to see. We don't know. Of course, there is Sheriff of Nottingham, Terry. Always good for a laugh. I look forward to getting pissed, as they say, with him, unless he doesn't drink. Sometimes I make that mistake. If you don't, I can't wait to throw back a few pints with Terry on the 2nd of April. After, of course, we see No Time to Die. And then, of course, Detective Jim is going to be coming to England with us. And there's Greg Smith building his snowspeeder. Thank you for this chat. If you like these chats, please hit like, as Gary Beekler says over at Nerdrotic. And if you don't watch Gary Beekler at Nerdrotic, you should. I quite enjoy Gary Beekler, even though sometimes we're on different sides of an ideological fence that doesn't really exist. But like he always says, please hit like, please subscribe. These YouTube channels, we need your help because the bigger guys are eating us up. And as Gary says, if you don't necessarily want to subscribe or like his channel, like or subscribe your favorite YouTuber's channel, which I think is great. And that's another reason why I like his Nerdrotic channel. Anyway, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank Lucky Tiger for the sponsorship. Watch out for Living the Lucky Tiger Life episode about Loreto, Mexico that I'm going to drop. It's kind of fun with James Hills from the mantripping.com blog. And I will say this once again, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. I'll be back on the John Campea show tomorrow. Hopefully not spewing from both ends. Anyway, Tallulah says goodbye, and come see Elizabeth's Art Walk, booth 15 at the Pasadena Art Walk this weekend. Thanks very much, and have a better day.